I've got to say, Mike, predicting this exact result. You continue to be right in your legal predictions on this show. We don't have Dave here today, but I'm sure he'd tip the hat to you as well. So what's your reaction to the decision that came out yesterday?
Predictable and predicted for many, many, many months, because the alternative to what the Supreme Court held in this Trump presidential immunity case would be the destruction of our Constitution, the destruction of the presidency, and therefore the destruction of our country. Think about this. If a president of the United States is not immune from criminal prosecution for his official acts, not personal misconduct, his official acts, you're going to see the Trump 47 Justice Department prosecuting President Obama for capital murder for his extrajudicial drone strike on 2 American citizens, including a minor. You're going to see the Trump 47 Justice Department prosecuting President Biden for his illegal mass parole of over 10 million illegal immigrants into our country and the resulting rapes and kidnappings and murders and other violent crime. You're going to see the Trump 47 Justice Department prosecute George W. Bush for lying about weapons of mass destruction and the resulting hundreds of thousands of deaths in Iraq. This was a monumental decision by the Supreme Court of the United States, authored by Chief Justice John Roberts, not exactly a MAGA warrior, because the Chief Justice rightly understood this is so much bigger than Donald Trump or any other president or candidate. This is about the presidency and therefore our country.
Mm-hmm. All right. So this is you, by the way. I just want to give you the credit that you're due. Back in, let me see, what was the date of this? Hold on. It's January, episode 695, predicting what the Supreme Court would do.
Look, the Supreme Court, if the D.C. Circuit does not hold that the President of the United States at a baseline level, any president has immunity from criminal prosecution for what that president does in his official capacity, the Supreme Court's going to have to take that case. And the reason the courts have not established that presidents are immune criminally is because no president has ever been charged with a crime until the Democrats brought this unprecedented lawfare against President Trump. So the issue is going to be, does the Supreme Court establish at a baseline minimum that the President of the United States is immune from criminal prosecution for his official acts or the outer perimeter of his official acts, like the other 2 branches of government? They can decide that very narrowly that, yes, the President of the United States is immune criminally from prosecution for his official conduct. Why would the president not be immune criminally, but he's immune civilly? It doesn't make sense.
I mean, literally every word of that was just found by the majority, 6-3. Every word of that. Immune for his official acts, including the outer perimeter. The outer perimeter would be an area in which he would have a presumption of immunity that they would then have to test if they wanted to, a prosecutor in court, try to pierce the immunity by proving it didn't apply in this particular case. And only clearly unofficial acts will be treated as not immune. This is, I have to say, you've been saying it since longer than January. From the beginning, you've been saying this exact thing. But now there's an absolute meltdown. And something you said in there was very important, because the left keeps saying the Supreme Court erred here in not considering this case, the Trump case. They need to consider how extraordinary what Trump did was, as opposed to just issuing down a ruling that would apply to the presidency in general and its powers. He's such an egregious character. He crossed such egregious legal lines in their view. This court erred by not considering what he did. And what you said in that answer, I think, is the response, which is, no, what you guys have done is what's truly extraordinary here, and it's what the court was responding to.
Absolutely. This is overreach by President Biden and Attorney General Merrick Garland and Jack Smith, who has an amazing track record of getting reversed by the Supreme Court of the United States and his henchmen. Jay Brad, these are the bad actors. These are the people who politicized and weaponized the Justice Department to go after Biden's political enemy because they fear they can't beat Trump on November 5th, 2024. So they've tried to bankrupt him. They've tried to throw him off the ballot. They're trying to throw him in prison for the rest of his life. They're even talking about drone striking him on these various left-wing shows. These people are insane. And guess what, guys? When you lose Chief Justice John Roberts, again, not exactly a MAGA warrior by any stretch of the imagination, you know you've lost the game.
Okay, so now let's go through some of the outlandish scenarios that the left is trying to tell us will happen as a result of this decision. I'll skip like the more egregious people, but here's one, quoting an elected DNC member from California, David Atkins. So if President Biden declared the Republican Party a terrorist organization and ordered drone strikes on Mar-a-Lago as an official act, he would have immunity, right? Those are the new rules. I mean, I realize a piece of this is facetious because I think even the left doesn't think that, President Biden would do this or President Trump in response. But what about that? Because using the military is 100% within official duties. And this court has also ruled you're not allowed to look at motive. You're not allowed to look at the motive behind the president's act. So let's be honest. Is it true that could happen? That President Biden could say the Republican Party is a terrorist organization and order drone strikes at Mar-a-Lago and not be criminally prosecuted for it?
That's not true. And remember, President Obama did order extrajudicial drone strikes of 2 American citizens, including a minor. He killed a minor. And they did this after seeking advice from David Barron, who was the head of the Justice Department's Office of Legal Counsel at the time, OLC, which is the general counsel for the executive branch. So they got David Barron's input on this drone strike. So David Barron's now a judge on the First Circuit Court of Appeals in Boston. He's a federal appellate judge. His wife is a loudmouth, pain in the ass CNN contributor. Can the Trump 47 Justice Department now charge Judge David Barron along with President Obama for this conspiracy to murder 2 Americans? Do they really want to go down this path as Democrats? Because guess what? When Trump's back in office, we can play this game if they want to play this game. President Biden, when they change his diaper this morning and feed him his pudding, he should be very thankful for the fact that the Supreme Court held that the President of the United States is immune from criminal prosecution, because after that debate, I hope he understands he's not going to be the president after January 20th, 2025. Right. And does he want crazy people like Mike Davis prosecuting him?
That's the thing. This applies to both sides. But I am I'm a little intrigued, I have to say, with the notion that maybe this guy is right, Mike, and I'm not sure how I feel about it. I mean, to me, it seems like that you could come up with such an outlandish designation in the course of your official duties, and then, the U.S. military would not do this. I mean, they're not allowed to follow illegal orders, but just the act of saying they're terrorists and I declare it so, and then ordering the military to do it, I think he would be criminally immune. I think now in the wake of this decision, tell me if I'm wrong, the remedy is impeachment. He will be thrown out of office and he will be stopped from making such outlandish decisions again, but he will not be criminally prosecuted because it seems to me the Supreme Court said, we're just not going to be a banana republic. We are not going to allow criminal prosecutions of a president for virtually anything done in his official capacity. That's the nature of the executive branch.
I disagree. So think about this. The Supreme Court said that when you're dealing with your core constitutional powers as the president of the United States, you're absolutely immune, meaning you can't be prosecuted, you can't be questioned about it. But when you're dealing with the president's other official acts, his powers that flow from statute versus the Constitution, he would be presumptively immune, but that presumption would be overcome. You'd have a mini trial, an evidentiary hearing on the issue of immunity, and the judge would say, okay, are you acting within your core constitutional powers? I don't see in the Constitution where the president is authorized to drone strike Americans, right? And so drone strike Americans on American soil. So you're not repelling. This is not the commander-in-chief clause. This is not the president's war powers under the Constitution. The president's not, repelling a sudden attack, which is the case law on the war powers. And so you're looking at the president's statutory powers, and under the president's statutory powers, the president could raise immunity as an initial matter, and then there would be a mini trial, an evidentiary hearing to figure out whether the government can rebut that presumption of immunity. And the standard they use is the Fitzgerald standard, the Nixon case from 40 years ago, where the Supreme Court held that the president is immune from civil prosecution for his official acts. And so the government could rebut that presumption of immunity by showing that the prosecution does not endanger the intrusion on the authority of the functions of the executive branch, meaning the executive branch doesn't have the power to kill Americans on American soil because they disagree with them politically.
Let's talk about something they do have the power to do. That's the pardon power. This came up over and over, came up in the oral argument, came up in the decision too. And one of the questions is, because that's definitely within the president's official constitutional acts. So it would be granted absolute immunity under this majority ruling. And the question is, okay, but what if the president took a bribe in exchange for the pardon? Would that be prosecutable in the wake of the Trump decision?
Yeah, because under the Nixon framework that they're extending to the criminal context, the civil context, they're extending to the criminal context, they've already held that bribery is not part of your official duties. Bribery is specifically carved out of the president's official duties in the Constitution.
Okay, but here's where it gets weird, and I made a reference to it earlier. The court also held that not only would these official acts be immune, either absolutely immune or with a presumption of immunity, but they cannot even be used, these acts, as evidence against a president who's getting prosecuted for his unofficial acts. So in this case, the Trump case, they claim the whole fake electors thing, that was all a scheme. And in order to present it to a jury, this came up at oral argument, in order to present it to a jury, we're going to need to talk about what are probably going to be unofficial acts, maybe dealing with state electors, and also official acts. Trump's conversations with his attorney general about, challenging the vote and what he can do and what the attorney general's looked into. And this court said, you cannot do that. You are not going to be able to get into the officially immune conduct as evidence in a case going after him for his non-immune conduct. So back to my bribery example, you'd have a case where if you prosecuted him, you'd say, so, Mr. President, you accepted a bribe. Yes. In exchange for what? Objection. Sustained. You can't tell them that it was a pardon that was on the line. It's an oddity, but I think that's the correct legal analysis. Am I wrong?
No, because there's a carve out for bribery. So that there's a constant. The bribery is
no, but the carve out allows the prosecution for bribery, but it will not allow a jury to hear why the bribe was paid.
I don't think it goes that far because there's a carve out for bribery in the Constitution. So you have to be able to prove the elements of bribery, right? And so you'd have to show the quid pro quo, and that the bribery is the.
I don't think you're
area,
right. I know you're right on everything, but on this particular thing, I think you're wrong because the court made very clear they don't want evidence of the official acts, anything that cannot come in as evidence. And Amy Coney Barrett wrote an opinion concurring with the overall decision, but saying, I disagree with this piece of it. You should allow it as evidence. We have evidentiary rules that would allow the jury to be instructed. We're allowing the fact that it was in exchange for a pardon to come in, but not to prove that he's guilty of the bribery, just so you have context, but you can't use the fact that he was exercising his pardon power against him. That's what she wanted the court to rule, but the majority said no.
Well, we might have that very case come before the court after President Biden leaves office with his pardon after his family took over $20 million. It seems like every Biden family member was on the Chinese and Russian and Ukrainian and Kazakhstan and every other dump around the world, corrupt third world country around the world. It seemed like every Biden except for the 6-year-old granddaughter who they don't claim, who Dr. Jill, the loving grandmother, doesn't claim. So, maybe we'll have that very case before the Supreme Court. Megyn, I would love to be the special counsel on that case if that office is still constitutional after this is all done. And maybe we'll find out whether the evidence of bribery can come in and when the president pardons himself, or how, that could be an amazing case for the Supreme Court to decide. And I just wonder if these three liberal justices on the Supreme Court who dissented, and all these commentators and left-wing hacks on MSNBC and other left-wing shows, I just wonder if they would take this same principled position they're taking right now if the Trump 47 Justice Department prosecutes President Biden for pardoning himself after a bribery.
You're absolutely right. All right, I want to get to some of the reaction. Let's start with the current president of the United States, Joe Biden, who, in what I thought was just a totally inappropriate White House address, comes out last night. I mean, let's face it, what he was really trying to do was improve his catastrophic situation right now in the wake of that debate, and act like the senior, the elder statesman, criticizing the Supreme Court from the White House and getting into President Trump's criminal trials in a way that was just totally inappropriate. Stay out of it. You're trying to look like you don't have anything to do with it. And, the jig is up. But here's just a bit of what the president said last night on this ruling.
This nation was founded on the principle that there are no kings in America. Each of us is equal before the law. No one is above the law, not even the President of the United States. With today's Supreme Court decision on presidential immunity, that fundamentally changed. For all practical purposes, today's decision almost certainly means that there are virtually no limits on what a president can do. This is a fundamentally new principle, and it's a dangerous precedent, because the power of the office will no longer be constrained by the law, even including the Supreme Court of the United States.
So, do we agree with the president?
I think that, I don't hate President Obama. I disagree with him because I actually think President Obama is personally a good person. I think President Biden is a wretched human being. And I think he is so destructive to the office of the president and to the presidency. And he's so selfish. He doesn't care about his country at all. He doesn't care about his family. He has his drug-addled son as the bagman for the Biden family corruption. He's taken inappropriate showers with his daughter, Ashley, according to his diary. He's always grooming kids on TV. I think the guy is a total scumbag, and he is the most destructive force in the White House we've ever seen. He's an evil man. And we just see this on display right there. How can he get up there and pretend like nobody is above the law and that the Supreme Court's at fault after he politicized and weaponized his Justice Department along with these other Biden Democrat prosecutors around the country to go after his political enemy? This is Republic ending. These are Republic ending tactics, what Joe Biden has done. And the Supreme Court had to step up with this presidential immunity case because they were pushed so far by this corrupt, deranged man named Joe Biden.
I mean, that's the thing, harsh assessment by any measure. But your point that he's the one responsible for this ruling, the Democrats are the ones responsible for this ruling, is entirely valid. The reason we've had to have the Supreme Court step in and say, we're not doing this in America. The founders did not envision a world in which presidents leave office and get subjected to criminal prosecutions by their successor president or his administration, is because they crossed the line never before crossed. And now you hear them saying, well, even on the New York Times, The Daily this morning, well, that's because we have an unprecedented president in Donald Trump who crossed lines never crossed before. Okay, so we've never had a president commit crimes before. Like you point out, Obama with the droning of an American citizen. Let's go back to what Bill Clinton did when he was in office. And we could go down a list with that guy. And Nixon, of course, was pardoned because he also was accused of committing crimes in office. But the point is, we generally have not prosecuted former presidents here. It's not the way the United States Constitution was set up. And the Supreme Court enforced the guardrails, stopping them from continuing this nonsense. And that leads me, well, before I get to the Trump case, because I do think that's really what I want to talk about. Let's get to the Rachel Maddow reaction, because you talk about the left-wing loons and how far they're taking it. Listen to her characterization of what the Supreme Court did.
The practical impact of what they have done is to give Trump immunity that even he and his counsel did not ask for. And given that the hypotheticals over the course of these arguments, as you rightly pointed out, included things like, can the president assassinate a rival? I think we have to look at the Supreme Court's affirmative answer to that. Yes, you can. With as much seriousness as it deserves. I mean, this is a death squad ruling. This is a ruling that says that as long as you can construe it as an official or quasi-official act, you can do absolutely anything.
Absolutely anything, including the death squads. I mean, this is to our earlier point, which is not true, because for most of the official acts, there will only be a presumption. It will be a strong presumption of immunity, but it will not be unpierceable.
Absolutely correct. And you know what? Where are these Democrats who are so concerned about the president being criminally prosecuted when you have a president of the United States sitting in office right now who is clearly corrupt, clearly compromised by over $20 million in foreign corruption to what seems like every Biden family member, right? And then you have a president who has not only indicted his leading presidential rival, Donald Trump, we have two top presidential advisors, Peter Navarro and Steve Bannon, sitting in federal prison right now for contempt of Congress after Trump asserted constitutional executive privilege going back 250 years to George Washington to prevent presidential aides from having to testify to courts or Congress. Biden and his Justice Department ignored that while they are giving amnesty to Hunter Biden, who ignored a congressional subpoena, was held in contempt after he did a
Merrick Garland
drive-by press conference. And Merrick Garland, Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, ignored a subpoena, got held in contempt for covering up for his boss. Merrick Garland turned over the transcript of Biden's conversation with special counsel Rob Hur, but then made this legally frivolous claim of executive privilege that he can't turn over the tape after he already turned over the transcript. And then Merrick Garland went down to his Office of Legal Counsel, one of his subordinates, and got a legal opinion, essentially a get out of jail free card, right? So I don't want to hear.
But honestly, this pairs perfectly, well, not perfectly, but it pairs with what Steve Bannon did and just reported to Danbury, Connecticut prison for. He too got a subpoena to appear in front of Congress. He objected, asserting executive privilege, got advice of an attorney saying that's the right thing to do. And Congress found him in contempt of Congress. All the same things as Merrick Garland. Only in one case, the DOJ prosecuted him and put him behind bars. And in the other, Merrick Garland, because he runs the DOJ, surprisingly, they had no interest in doing that.
Yeah, and Peter Navarro, the White House trade director. They put the White House trade. Peter Navarro is still in prison, while Hunter Biden, where there's zero claim of executive privilege, there's like crackhead son privilege. I'm not sure what it is, but he doesn't get prosecuted for contempt after his drive-by press conference, where he clearly was able to show up to the House that day. They got him out of the crack den, and he was able to go to the House that day, but he couldn't testify, right? Are you kidding me? And then, like you said, with Merrick Garland.
Yeah, go ahead. Finish your point on Merrick.
I was going to say that on January 20th, 2025, we're going to find out if these same robots are going to be saying the mantra that nobody's above the law when the Trump 47 Justice Department prosecutes Hunter Biden for contempt and prosecutes Merrick Garland for contempt.
So because the congressional House Republicans are now pursuing in civil court an order that would compel Merrick Garland to fork over the audio tape of Joe Biden in his consultation or his interview with special counsel Robert Hur, saying that, because the objection on paper was, we don't want AI to make replicas of the president's voice and use it again. It was such a nonsense objection. The president's voice is everywhere. They can, if AI gurus want to take the president's voice and create a version of it, I'm sure they've already done it. They don't need the Robert Hur audio tape. This is very, very clearly a political objection. They know what's on that tape, I think, is going to sound very much like what we heard at that debate. And they have the attorney general doing the president's bidding to try to keep it away from the electorate before the election. So do you think that this district court will order the production of the audio tape.
Yeah, yes. And if they don't, the appellate court will, because they established very clearly under the Trump administration that Congress has these powers. And so now these precedents from under the Trump administration are going to come back and bite these Democrats in the ass. And we were talking about that. There's also the Fisher case, the 18 USC 1512 obstruction of an official proceeding that deals with the destruction of evidence or the hiding of evidence. This might actually apply to this particular case because the attorney general is hiding evidence from Congress. And that's a felony under the Fisher, under the 18 USC 1512. And then he's conspiring with others to hide this evidence, conspiracy, obstruction of official proceeding. I mean, these cases that are in Trump's favor now may be very much needed by President Biden and Merrick Garland and these others who are pretending nobody's above the law.
I agree with that. All right, let's talk about what this means for the prosecutions against Donald Trump. First and foremost, I think this Clarence Thomas concurrence about Jack Smith not being a proper special counsel. He didn't say he's not. He said he's got serious questions about whether he's an appropriate special counsel, given that we don't have a special counsel statute anymore. He hasn't been properly appointed by the executive branch. He's not somebody who's been appointed by the president, confirmed by the Senate. And he said he thinks that we should be determining whether the special counsel is valid at all before we proceed with any of these prosecutions. Was a very interesting tell on whether Jack Smith can survive, because that's another legal argument that's working its way up through the courts right now. And I'll bet you anything he's got another 4 votes on his side on that. What did you make of that?
There's no question he does, because Jack Smith's office is clearly unconstitutional. You have to have offices established by the Constitution or by congressional statute. The independent counsel statute expired after the Ken Starr investigation of Clinton. Congress has never reestablished an independent counsel or a special counsel office. It's been done through Department of Justice regulations. And the problem with that is when you are hiring, essentially Jack Smith's not an officer. He's an employee. He's just like an assistant U.S. attorney in a U.S. attorney's office. But the difference is the U.S. attorney is Senate confirmed and appointed by the president, and that U.S. attorney supervises the assistant U.S. attorneys on a day-to-day basis. The special counsel regulations actually make it where the attorney general, to whom the special counsel reports on paper, actually can't supervise the special counsel on a day-to-day basis. So this is clearly unconstitutional, this whole special counsel regime.
That's another one that, if the high court rules accordingly, would help Joe Biden. Because if special counsel Jack Smith is not appropriate, then special counsel Robert Hur.
Right, Davis.
Right. You never know. I mean, that could come back to help him as well. But okay, here is Trump's attorney, Will Scharf, on how he thinks this immunity decision is going to affect the New York trial. And there's breaking news on Trump's maneuvering in that trial. This January 11th sentencing may be off. Watch.
Yeah, absolutely, Caitlin. The Supreme Court was very clear that for acts that fall within the outer perimeter of the president's official responsibilities, acts that are presumptively immune from prosecution, that evidence of those acts cannot be used to try essentially private acts. So what we have in New York is a situation where a substantial number of official acts of the presidency, things that we believe are official acts, were used as evidence to support the charges in that New York trial. We believe that corrupts that trial, that indicates that jury verdict needs to be overturned. And at the very least, we deserve a new trial where those immune acts will not come into evidence as the Supreme Court dictated today.
And no sooner did he say that, Mike, than Trump filed a motion seeking to throw out this verdict, saying you allowed official acts to come into evidence, and that was improper, pursuant to our discussion earlier. And therefore, there should be no sentencing, and this conviction should be overturned. How do you like his chances?
Well, if you had a fair judge, you'd have very good chances. But I think that this evidence is what Will Scharf just said is absolutely correct, and it's going to get this conviction reversed on appeal for that issue alone. But the issue, and there are so many other issues. The problem is that you have a corrupt partisan rigged process and a corrupt and partisan judge in this Juan Merchan, whose adult daughter he donated to Biden and another anti-Trump cause that creates a recusal issue under New York statute. You also have the fact that his adult daughter, Lauren Merchan, is raising millions of dollars off this unprecedented trial of Trump in New York, requiring Judge Merchan's recusal under New York statute. And that's not just me saying it. Will was just on Caitlin Collins' show. There was a former federal Clinton judge on Caitlin Collins' show on April 5th who said very clearly that Judge Merchan had to recuse under New York statute because his daughter has a financial stake in this criminal prosecution. She's raising millions of dollars as a Democrat fundraiser. She's taking a cut. When President Trump raised this as evidence with Judge Merchan retaliated against President Trump and said that he's going to throw Trump in prison if he mentions Lauren Merchan's name. There are so many other reasons that this trial was corrupt. You had a rigged jury selection.
But wait, I don't
process.
want to go back all through the New York trial, but I do think I'm interested because I think this judge will either some of these acts he'll say were unofficial. He'll say they were clearly unofficial and therefore not within the Supreme Court's ruling. But some of them, he's going to have a trickier time saying were clearly unofficial. I mean, some of these actions that Trump was prosecuted for happened while he was in the Oval Office. He was the sitting president. And I don't know, there's at least a colorable argument. And this court is saying the lower courts need to have a hearing, an evidentiary hearing to figure out whether it's official or unofficial. And if he decides not to do that, I mean, no judge wants to be reversed. That's the number one thing they don't want. And in the way, like, it would be pretty brazen to flout the U.S. Supreme Court within a week of its ruling. I said before January 11th, the hearing's on July 11th for Trump's sentencing. I don't know. And something interesting happened on Monday, Mike. The prosecution was supposed to make its sentencing recommendation for Trump, and it didn't in the New York case, at least not that the docket reflects. So what do you think is going to happen? You think he's actually going to get sentenced on July 11th, or do you think this judge is going to take another look?
I think this judge is going to sentence Trump on July 11th because this judge has proven over and over and over that he's ignored the Supreme Court and the Constitution, including the fact that the judge said that the jury did not have to unanimously agree to all the elements of the criminal charges. They can disagree on the underlying second crime that turned bookkeeping misdemeanors into felonies. The judge just said, oh, you could pick whatever you want. You can have 444 or whatever you want, right? So this judge has proven over the course of this trial he doesn't care about what the Supreme Court has held in the past, and he's corrupt. He doesn't want his daughter Lauren Merchan to get cut off from the Democrat fundraising machine.
And he hates Trump.
She's making a lot of money.
And he hates Trump. And I think that's his biggest motivation of all. Here was an interesting point, something I've never said before, by Lawrence O'Donnell last night on his show, because the January 6th case is all but dead. I mean, it's all but dead. In the wake of Fisher, which gutted the main claim against Trump on the January 6th stuff, and now in the wake of the presidential immunity ruling, I don't know what's left. But Judge Chutkan, the district court judge in that case, is going to have said evidentiary hearing. And the court seemed very disdainful of her. The majority was saying, like, in a case this complex and this important, there was no evidentiary hearing at all on what the nature of the acts was, whether they were considered in his official capacity or as candidate Trump, and seemed to be chastising the lower court and, frankly, the D.C. Court of Appeals for rushing to judgment because they so wanted to get Trump as opposed to doing their jobs. So good for the SCOTUS majority on that. In any event, though, now there will be a hearing by Judge Chutkan, who doesn't like Trump. And Lawrence O'Donnell made the following point. Take a listen.
The very bad news for Donald Trump in this decision today, and for candidate Trump, very, very bad, is that Mike Pence is going to walk into a federal courtroom, raise his right hand, take an oath to tell the truth, and testify against Donald Trump in this case in September. But you're going to see this incredible January 6th hearing on steroids, possibly for 6-8 weeks, September, October, maybe.
So do you agree with that? Not that it's going to be terrible for Trump, but do you think that's what's about to happen?
It could, but remember, the Supreme Court also said that the president's communications with his vice president, I think I'd have to go back and look at the opinion. I thought it was part of his core constitutional responsibilities to
I think
communicate
they
with his
said
vice president.
I think they said probably. I think that one got less protection than attorneys conversations with the attorney general, and I think that's more situation based, so presumption or at least subject to a fact finding hearing.
Yeah, well, I think they said at least the presumption, right? So we'll see on that one. I think that
Yeah.
communications between the president and the vice president might be core constitutional responsibilities that are absolutely immune. But even if Pence comes in and testifies against Trump, I don't think the American people give a damn about January 6th, right? I just think people are way over January 6th. They care about the fact that interest rates are very high, inflation is bad, the border is a disaster, crime is high. They're not doing well at home, right? They're suffering at home. So I don't think they care about what the DC Democrats care about January 6th. They act like it's they act like it's worse than the Civil War, and the American people just don't give a damn. And that's what's so
Yeah, like
frustrating.
if we could just have one more hearing on it, then people will see it the way we see it. Like we've had hearings coming out the ears on this thing. We've had an impeachment process, primetime addresses. We've had a whole congressional committee, executive produced by ABC News, former chief executive. I mean, my God, how many more can we have before they realize what you said? People care about their kitchen table issues. Okay, I've got to ask you, is this going to get rid of the Florida case too? I mean, there's just, I feel like this ruling is absolutely devastating to potentially the Georgia case, potentially the Florida case, potentially, yes, the January 6th case and New York. But how much would you say is getting gutted by the immunity ruling yesterday?
The Florida case is a little bit different because that was retention of records after he left office. But I'll tell you what, these January 6 cases are toast, just absolutely toast, which I think is great because January 6 has become the Democrats' high holy holiday. And I think it's just awesome that it was the Chief Justice, John Roberts, not exactly a MAGA warrior, who destroyed the Democrats' holiday.
Well, we'll see. I mean, Atlanta's dead on the vine right now anyway, because Fani Willis's disqualification is up on appeal. Florida, it's not going particularly well on the rulings for them down there. And we'll have to see. But nothing's happening before Election Day. And that's what everyone says. I mean, the president himself said it in his address from the White House last night. Every liberal pundit, every legal pundit said this officially puts to bed the possibility of an actual legal case prior to Election Day. We'll see whether Jack Smith tries to make something happen before swearing in day in January, which is their next great hope. Never dull moment, Mike Davis. Thank you so much for your sage analysis.